make a state in Shitata. They did so, or so, as so laden. They began to show films where his cars suffered disasters, accidents, and breakdowns, and Ford's cars were not being bought. His solvency, power, and company were immediately affected, but cars were not being purchased. He was forced to submit to this international Jewish mafia, even though he opposed it. They broke him through films. Therefore, the win here is always predetermined for the creditor. Here is this formula. K divided by C plus K is always less than K with interest divided by C plus K. That is, the win is always predetermined for the creditor. It is clear that the interest rate devours solvent demand and makes it impossible to sell any part of the product because those who would like to buy do not have money. If the interest rate reaches housing and food, then this is already a weapon of genocide. On a global scale, this is carried out under the guidance of transnational banking clans and their occult masters. Here is an interesting diagram that visually shows how all this is done. Look, here are the people's economies. Producer and the seller and the buyers, here they function. This is the market of the production sphere, and this is the market of paid consumption. This is society, the buyer of the final product. And here is what happens. How does the money come in? The buyer purchases in the production market. Here he receives a salary from the production market. This salary he buys products. This is how the money circulates here. That is what I told you. Goods and services, and the money goes in the opposite direction. And here sits, you see, a red bug, drunk on blood. The banker lender. What does he do? Look. He gives a loan of 1,000 rubles to the producer and sucks back 1,200. Gave 1 million, but sucks back 1,200,000. So a bloodsucker, that is, the money constantly flows to him. It's all very simple. There should be exactly as much money as there are goods and services. Banks are needed. Let there be banks, but let them lend like they do in Japan. In Japan, banks lend at 0% interest. That is, whatever you give, that's what you take back. And at whose expense? Bank employees. Purchase money. They enter here into production, such as this. The bank is an element of production. And in Japan, there are 6 large financial industrial groups, which also have banks. But they essentially lend at 0 interest rates. And in China, lending rates reach negative values. State banks give a farmer 100 yuan, and the farmer returns 90 after a year. Why? We already covered this a few minutes ago. Not everything that is financially beneficial is reasonable for the life of society. That is, help must be provided to someone to get back on their feet. Therefore, the system of grants, subsidies, and lending can be implemented either according to this concept or that one. And that's the trick of it. So what is literally the conclusion from this? Interest-based lending in our society should be completely and permanently eliminated. Because it is unnatural, it destroys the national economic complex. It allows parasites such as bloodsuckers to thrive. Interest-based lending. Interest rates should be equal to 0. We have already asked ourselves the question of what formula is used to calculate that $1 is worth 29 rubles and 32 kopecks. And we came to the obvious conclusion that such a formula does not exist and cannot exist. So why? You will not find this in any textbook. Is it even possible to invent such a formula? Currently, there is no such formula. Let's figure this out. Right now, you know that. Rothschild fixing procedures are in effect, which we have discussed. And by the definition of the price of gold per troy ounce, the global financial mafia controls the management of national economic complexes. That is, it knows which elite state has started to buy gold for its reserves, or conversely, the impoverished elite is spending all its gold reserves to maintain its decent standard of living. That is, it knows the situation in the country, and by setting the price per troy ounce, can regulate the prosperity or misfortune of various countries. Previously, the gold standard was used to compare currencies, and we have also discussed what it was based on. Is it possible now, as many economists say, to return to the gold standard? No. Why? Because in the past, all products were made based on human and animal muscle power. That is, biogenic forces were expended. The craftsman worked as long as he had the strength. They plowed the land with oxen, cows, and horses, and when biogenic energy was expended on the production of goods and services, anything could be taken as an invariant in the price list. One could, as King Hammurabi tried, use grain or sheep, but they took gold. And we have already said, you reap what you sow. Remember how Buratino sowed in the field of wonders, and what the fox Alice and the cat Basilio did with him. Thus, the gold standard objectively died, and this mafia transitioned to fixing not just out of idleness, but out of desperation, because it was necessary to somehow regulate these processes at the macro level. And on what basis can all this be returned? And on what basis? Now, all goods and services are produced using electricity, relying on electricity and traction. That is, the electric pump pumps oil, the electric saw cuts wood, the electric planer planes, the electric motor moves the loom and fabric is produced, the electric sewing machine, the electric razor, and so on. Everything runs on electricity. Therefore, if we assume that in country X there are many primary electric installations that can supply factories for the production of fabric, metal, and so on, and in country Y there is, for example, no electricity, where there are more goods and services, there is more electricity. This can generally explain everything simply. So how do you evaluate and compare the price of a product in detail? How do you compare the price, for example, of a bun and a brick? They seem to have the same shape. How much electricity was spent on baking a bun? Yes. How much when this bread was sown, when it was harvested, when it was stored in the elevator, when it was ground at the mill, baked in the oven, and delivered by truck? That's the cost, right? How much electricity was exactly spent on baking this bun? And how much electricity for the brick? Yes, the clay needs to be extracted, loaded, and brought to the brick factory. So, how much is needed there for the electric machine to mix this clay? How long does the firing last in the electric furnace, or some other furnace, for example, one that runs on fuel oil? All of this can be compared. Based on the comparison of energy spent, one can say, yes, 1 kilowatt was used for the bun, and 2 kilowatts for the brick. So it turns out everything is very simple. But then it means that our country is the richest in the world, because we have plenty of electricity, we have reserves of gas, oil, and coal, and nuclear power plants. After all, no one can even store waste with us, because our country is vast. Here's the thing. That's why our officials are trying to dismantle things. And why do we live so poorly? Because we live according to a foreign concept. I could go on, but now let's examine more closely what I said. Because in the concept of public safety, we say that we need to introduce the concept of energy ruble. That is, the paper, if there was a gold standard before, was at least backed by gold in the homeland's reserves. But then the gold standard was abolished. Why, you see? When the states pursued the policy of the dollar is the world currency, and the United States then said, when they announced to everyone, our dollar is backed by gold, and de Gaulle already understood where things were heading and loaded all that money. He took the green paper waste to the planes, ships, and said, give me your green gold. And the states got scared. Remember, de Gaulle said, I'm leaving your NATO to force them to return the gold. And the dollar was no longer backed by anything because the states, in order to deceive all of humanity, printed dollars much faster than all countries extracted oil. The dollar is not backed by anything. It now exceeds the turnover that exists on the planet by several times. Ludwig Kircher was more cunning. He quietly took it away so as not to make a fuss. And the states quickly exchanged it for gold. They returned everything, that is. And they tried to pressure de Gaulle, those Americans. They switched to Rothschild's fixing because the gold standard was no longer viable. And fixing is the bare arbitrariness of the global financial mafia. Fixing comes from the word fixation. They fixed it like this. And what do they base their decisions on? You, Rothschild, Oppenheimer, Morgan, Leb, Kuhn, Abraham, and so on. What do we base our decisions on? So that the Russians live well in Russia. Keep your pockets wider. What do they base their decisions on? To ensure that oil and gas flow to the West. That's why they lower us through the sloping currency corridor. And how to restore justice in relations between countries. And I told you, with electricity, with electric traction, if you have electric traction, you'll have bricks, iron, pumps to pump, saws for wood, everything. But without electricity, cuckoo, grinya, that's it. The energy man, from a more scientific perspective, we will consider what we said about the energy standard. The standard is the basis for forming statistics of macroeconomic systems. Production consumes electricity, biogenic, and technogenic energy. This means that the total solvency, S+, opposes a certain energy potential that society possesses. Biogenic energy is determined by the collection of grain and silage, while crop and water management determines the ratio of urban to rural population. Well, it should be like this. Everyone knows that bread is the head of everything. This is an axiom. So mathematically, this is presented here. The formula. I won't disclose it. Those who want can take a look. Here, there is the collection of grain, total population, standard of sufficiency, losses, and so on. And all of this should be in accordance, changes in the rural population, changes in productivity efficiency. If the formula is violated, it results in chaos, like now with our dacha being hundreds of kilometers away, and people are generally engaged in aneurysm. Look how they mock us. This unfortunate patch of land with grandfather's pumpkin house, or like in Chapelin, remember, the plywood house. People are suffering. They are not resting there, but trying to survive, growing some radishes to get at least some vitamins. It's such nonsense. There is no infrastructure developed there. The water is running out. In other words, none of this is done systematically. In short, it's a dispersion of forces and resources. If you're going to build a house, it should be done in a way that several generations can live there, so that there is space to run on the lawns. But there every bed is counted, every meter, and so they spend half a day getting there, and half a day coming back. Look at the traffic jams around Moscow. Russia has excellent prospects in this sense. You can create estates with gardens and vegetable patches where families can live. For now, you see what it's like. This is what concerns biogenic energy. Industrial production is limited by the capacity of primary technical electrical installations. Therefore, if there is growth in these electrical installations, there is also growth in production. The growth of electrical installations in prosperous countries over the last 50 years is currently estimated at 3 to 5% per year. Therefore, lending rates are still acceptable if they correspond to this figure. If lending rates are higher, then it's complete madness. So here is a simple scheme, as we explained to you. In simple terms, in the country, goods and services are produced based on the capacity of primary electrical installations. Goods and services must correspond to a certain monetary mass. Therefore, the amount of money can be compared to the capacity of primary electrical installations. Draw side X next to this, draw side Y next to it, and compare them with each other. This is generally what we are talking about. KOB. From what we have said, here is C plus K How is it defined and what does it consist of? From the price of grain, the annual grain harvest, the price per kilowatt hour of electricity, the capacity of all primary power plants, meaning how many hours in a day, for the number of days, well, this is the complex part of the formula. In simplified terms, C plus K corresponds to the capacity of the primary power plants of the power station. And the ST standard is a means of payment in the credit and financial system. This is the energy supply standard. In other words, the gold standard is already dead. This is a ghost and can only scare the uninformed crowd in economics. Now the basis of all economic calculations can only be the energy supply standard. Here is the exclamation mark. And then, in the dimensionless credit and financial systems of two states, X and Y, S plus K, X and S plus K, Y, the relative exchange rates disappear, which is currently determined by the fixing procedure of Rothschild, and only the electricity supply of the unified total solvency of society remains. And this is for X and for Y, each has its own. How can we pose the task further? To say we have a lot of electricity, but we waste it ineffectively. That is, the light bulbs are on day and night. So it's also correct, meaning it can be consumed thoughtlessly. That is, if the management of the national economy complex is wasteful, then what should be done? And in the concept of public security, dead water also mentions this. Then, what should the absolute exchange rate of the currency unit be? At the core, the first thing is the energy supply standard. Second is the concept of managing the state's energy potential. And these are technologies, the spectrum of production, meaning orientation towards a demographically determined spectrum of needs and everything else. That is the alignment of goal vectors with the hierarchically highest. And the third is the quality of management according to this concept. That is the correspondence of the goal vector. Therefore, from everything we have discussed, the high exchange rates of developed countries are based on the energy resources of underdeveloped countries, that is, us. That is, we are being robbed like fools, and we don't even try to figure out how we are being conned. And in the concept of public safety, we say, here it is for all of you. Now we have our own concept. It just needs to possess the minds of people and so on, and we subordinate it to our ideals, and then it is all demonstrable. Just look, everything here is demonstrable. How many windmills are there in Switzerland? And how many parking lots do we have for Shushenskaya hydropower plants, nuclear power plants, and so on? The energy standard of means of payment corresponds to the concept of energy invariant in the price list. It is already clear that the introduction of the concept of energy standard will allow for fairness. In determining the correspondence of currencies in trade between different countries, that is, in international trade and so on, and we say that trade should only be conducted in rubles, and ruble must be backed by energy. That is, we need to introduce the concept of the Russian energy ruble, the Russian ruble, and trade only in these rubles. Why? Because they will buy our goods, I will say. Why? Because our energy ruble is backed by real raw materials. In the States, it is backed by nothing. Why are they so anxious? They have nothing to back the paper they have printed over the years. And by the way, Arab countries are rebuilding. They have already transferred 70 streams of financial resources from the States to Europe. That is why Bush is pursuing such a policy. And the Arabs already understand this. I told you why the euro was created. It is an attempt to gradually distance itself from the dollar by the global financial mafia. The Arabs have already started talking about creating their own gold dinar. That is a Muslim currency. Again, what principle is this? It is not global. That is, we want to gather ourselves and we will do it. The submarine is already assembled. So we need to offer the same for the other compartments. Therefore, what I told you and the Arabs and so on All of this are private tasks, attempts to solve their private problems. They will succeed because the submarine is assembled, and each side or group is just one, two, or several compartments. And since the submarine is unified, we need to establish a common order for all compartments. That is why the concept of public safety proposes such an order. In particular, regarding the determination of exchange rates and the establishment of fairness, this is the introduction of the concept of the energy ruble. And as soon as we do this, actually, our country will immediately solve many problems. We conclude here the discussion of the block of economic issues that are included in the concept of public safety. And summarizing briefly, before drawing a general conclusion, what can be said? First, I haven't told you everything. Those who want to learn more about all these things, from integrals to differentials and various topics, there is a work. This is a brief course. The main work, National Economic Aspects of Life. Russia needs entrepreneurial Bolsheviks. The hernia of the economy should be excised. About the relationships between macroeconomics and microeconomics. Economics for man, clerks, and economics for owners. That is, there are many works of the internal predictor of the USSR, where everything is presented in sufficient detail, very seriously, fundamentally. All that we have tried to master together with you in such a popular presentation. I think, well, a general understanding is already in place. What are the key things here integrally? Economics does not work by itself. It is a managed process. Management is conducted according to a certain concept. Planned and market. This is nonsense. Why? Because a plan is a vector of goals, while the market is a way to achieve those goals. Therefore, to glorify private enterprise and the market economy is foolishness, because it is also impossible to oppose them, because the vector of goals is opposed to the method of achieving that goal. It is necessary to see the credit and financial system as a means of managing the national economic complex. Because with the help of loans, grants, and subsidies, one can manage and bring the economy, what is called the economy, into a stable balancing mode. One can transition from one mode to another, but one can also foolishly ruin everything, which is what our democratizers are doing. This must be seen. The orientation of the economy towards a demographically determined spectrum of needs. Why? Because people have two spectra of needs. Demographically determined and degradation parasitic. Demographically determined needs are predictable. Therefore, if the national economy is oriented towards meeting these needs, it will function sustainably. But if it focuses on degradation parasitic needs, then there will be poor harvests. Livestock will die, cherry will grow in inconvenient places, there will be a crisis or something else. A multitude of problems, they are unpredictable. Therefore, degradation parasitic needs, being unnatural, must be suppressed. This can all be done through the pricing system, etc. From the perspective of establishing justice, the concept of an energy ruble should be introduced, because all these Rothschild fixings, the gold standard, all of that is already in the past. Currently, the correspondence of currencies, currency parity, and trade, when discussing a fair relationship between different countries, peoples, and macroeconomics, can only be discussed with the concept of introducing an energy security standard based on electricity and electrical installations. That is, there are installations that can produce goods. Products are produced, but there are no installations. Therefore, we say that lending should be interest-free, because if lending is with interest, it becomes in fact a source of inflation. In general, I briefly summarize the results, so you can see that in the concept of public safety, the block of economic issues has been addressed quite thoroughly and seriously. And those who are interested are invited. All this work exists. It is available on the website and in printed publications. You can purchase books at the headquarters of our party in all regions of the country. You can order from the central headquarters by phone. You can check our website. There are many analytical notes, such as those from the internal predictor of the USSR. Regarding the economic issues that were reported in the Kremlin, even during Yeltsin's time, in attempts to reason with him, unfortunately, it did not happen. So we indeed conclude the discussion of the fourth priority of generalized means of managing people. And I would like to say one more thing in conclusion regarding bloc economic issues. It is necessary to see the influence of this fourth process, that is, the bloc of economic issues, in the entirety of the other means, and cannot separate one from the other. That is, the economy should be viewed from the perspective of the influence of religious dogmas, the ideological teachings of Karl Marx, and historical teachings. Rather, historical legends, myths that exert influence, and the habitual patterns that people have in managing the economy. That is, to look at the entirety of generalized means of management.